It's an amazing thing when this is just a sound, of course. But even that can be disturbing when you are looking for something to be disturbed by. And even with a little thing like that, it's amazing to see that that which was disturbing, when it's no longer resisted, is surrounded by peace. And that applies to small things, like that sound. It also applies to big things. Or one could almost say anything can take you there. Anything can take you into peace. Any condition that arises now, that is not resisted. And very often, if it is unpleasant or not harmonious, very often it will quickly disappear, and many of you have experienced that in your own life, that things that you did not want but were there didn't go away until you completely accepted that they are there, and suddenly they were gone. And similarly, something that you want in your life, many of you have also experienced that already. When the wanting goes, wanting implies future and so on. Suddenly, it's there. When your sense of self no longer depended on it, it's there. So, miracles happen through surrender. Incredible miracles, both small miracles and big miracles, happen through surrender. I recommend a film called Groundhog Day, which shows the human condition as one man is forced to relive the same day again and again and again, and he hates it. And he can't get out of it. And he hates it even more. And he tries to commit suicide, and he kills himself many times, and every morning he wakes up again in the same day. Until finally, he doesn't resist anymore. Finally, he allows that to be. And that day, from being the most dreadful day, becomes transformed into a nice day. He helps so many people because his resistance is gone. That day becomes beautiful, wonderful, and in the end he doesn't want to leave it anymore. Let's stay here, he says, and then he's out of it. A beautiful parable. So, although in the media to a large extent the old consciousness is still reflected, occasionally these days you can see the new consciousness coming through here and there in films. They may not even be on the surface spiritual, be called spiritual as such, and yet something is coming through the new. Whether it be a film about playing golf, the legend of Bhagavans, a film about stillness and connect with animals, which I saw recently, although it's quite old, The Horse Whisperer, somebody who is able to enter the state of stillness and communicate with horses through stillness. And even American Beauty is a film that brings in something, a new consciousness comes in of what is possible. That last one I mentioned is a film where you are shown a piece of paper being tossed about by the wind, and you watch that for 2 minutes, and it's beautiful. It's miraculous, something nobody would look at twice. Every moment when you give it your attention has a beauty, sometimes on the surface, sometimes hidden underneath the surface. On the surface, in nature, how your perception of nature deepens when you are present as you walk in nature. The depth that a flower has that it didn't have when you labeled it mentally immediately, because you relate it to a mental label, not to a flower. Oh, look at that beautiful so-and-so, blah, 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 blah. No, truly look. And then the beauty that is hidden, even and particularly in the face of disaster, loss, and death, which everybody, sooner or later, will face in him or herself, and will also face with people close to you. And there, the beauty is not apparent immediately on the surface of things, on the surface of that moment. And the thinking mind can only see the surface and reacts to the surface phenomenon of this moment. And at this moment, something or someone may be dying. And the mind calls it dreadful, bad, awful. If death is dreadful, bad, awful, then all of life is dreadful, bad, awful. Every form is destined to die. Each one of us in this room could have a date of death imprinted on his or her hand, and you look, oh, what's my date? Well, it'll happen. When it happens, it won't be tomorrow, but now. So if death is bad, then nothing makes sense. The whole of life is misery, because everything is already condemned. The moment of birth, everything is already condemned to death. What a dreadful, tragic, cruel world that is if death is bad. But it's a fact, it is. And what it conceals is beautiful and sacred. And I want to point to this without giving you any explanation, mental or conceptual thing that explains it somehow so that you can rearrange in your mind the way in which you judge death. Maybe it's not so bad after all. You'll have another incarnation, you can go on, you'll have another opportunity to be miserable. To look more closely at death without taking refuge in concepts, beliefs. Because you may believe or not believe that there's another incarnation coming. I'm not saying there is or isn't, because we are not dealing here with belief. If I say, yes, you will reincarnate, some of you will say, great, I knew that already. And some others will say, oh, I don't think that's true. And it would require belief. Nothing here requires really belief on your part. So we'll stay with just the fact of death, which comes sooner or later, which also comes in other forms in your life as loss, great loss of one kind or another, of physical ability, of social status, of a partner. Somebody leaves you, something leaves you, and of course the actual death of a human being, or the sense of your own approaching death. And usually this is regarded as so dreadful that you can't even talk about it. In hospitals, even now, they don't mention it ever. Oh, no, you're not going to die. No, nobody dies here. And so, facing what is becomes very powerful when that which is death, and you face death without seeking refuge in some explanations. Just face it as you would face a flower or anything that appears, takes form in this moment. But when something dies, one could say it's not that something is taking form at this moment. It's more beautiful than that. It's beautiful if something takes form at this moment. You could call that birth. But death is something loses form at this moment. A form of life dissolves. And when that is faced completely, that which is beyond form shines through the dissolving form. And that is why, although the present moment is always sacred, and you know that when you move your attention into it, you could be anywhere. And I don't need to define further what that means. Only the mind would ask, please define sacred. I don't understand. You know what it means directly at this moment when you hear that this moment is always sacred, but you don't know this unless your attention moves and you become aligned with it. It's always sacred, but it is more deeply sacred at the moment of death, which could be your own death or death of somebody close to you. Even the death of some, not necessarily a human being, but the death of some form that contained your sense of self. It dissolves. And more people have realized the truth of who they are and the truth of life through death, through facing death, or some great loss, which is the equivalent of death, more people have realized it through that than through any spiritual teaching. Something that was defined in form loses its form. And if you've ever been with someone, I've spoken to many people who sat next to someone who died, and also to one or two people who actually died and came back. And whenever that fact of death was not resisted, it was realized as a moment of incredible depth and sacredness. A woman I met witnessed how her son, 30-year-old son, died in hospital. She was sitting next to him. And she said that was the most sacred moment of her life, and she was never the same after that. And that acceptance only in her case lasted for 2 minutes. After that, thought came in. And the emotions that come with those thoughts came in, and it was called dreadful. But for 2 minutes, she was in the state of acceptance, and that had an incredible depth and sacredness. And even if you have seen people that were approaching death, sometimes you can see already before actual physical death happens, the form is already becoming, one could say, transparent almost. And something shines through that can almost describe as light. And what that is the unconditioned, the essence, consciousness itself, shining through the dissolving form. So the most sacred thing in life is that which is most feared by the egoic entity, because the egoic entity is form, is identification with form as me, is identification with the physical form as me, and the psychological form, the story of me. And that goes. In some cases, when people know they're going to die soon, it can happen that before the physical form dissolves, the psychological form of me doesn't survive in the face of death when it's accepted. So already the me entity that perhaps they were controlled by, identified with throughout their lives, shortly before death, it could be a few days, a few weeks, a few months, already dies. And then a flowering happens through that human being. It's the realization of who they are beyond the form. They realize it not as some intellectual realization, a deep experiential realization, as deep peace. And a knowing beyond needing any kind of proof that there is no death, that it is a form dissolving. And people have realized it in the face of great loss, when some form that they had invested with self left them. It could be the loss of a partner, it could be the loss of all your possessions in the stock market crash. In the stock market crash, they happen occasionally. Some people jump out of the window. They cannot separate, this is famous in the 30s or whenever it happened, Many people apparently lost all their money, and many jumped out of windows. They could not separate from their story-based sense of self. And the story-based sense of self was deprived of their main ingredient. But it has happened to others who, in the face of total loss, which is a kind of death, experienced a sudden inner opening up, a sudden space. Why was there a sudden inner space? Because the inner form that they had identified with in their psychological form identity dissolved. It died. When a form dissolves, that which is deeper than form shines through the hole that it leaves, the opening. This is an amazing thing. And it applies to every kind of death. An opening appears, one could say, in the fabric of phenomenal existence. For a moment, that opening appears in what before was a dense fabric of phenomenal existence. And suddenly, within that density of the fabric of phenomenal existence, something, a little thing there dissolves. And for a moment, just light comes through. Whereas before it was filtered through many layers of texture. And so it's the deepest spiritual thing is death. And that is good to know, because each one of you will face it sooner or later. But the amazing thing is, this is death here. Because the form identity, that which I thought I was, the thought form of me, you realize is not me. It dissolves as a me entity. So here, and this is the beauty of true spiritual teaching, in the presence of true spiritual teaching, which is not of a person, the teaching that is happening here, if you even call it teaching, is arising out of this energy field. Each one of you contributes to this teaching. To have a true view of it, you would look upon it as if it were, these words are arising out of your own consciousness. There's no separation. And so a true spiritual teaching is similar to death. It also is an opening where suddenly spaciousness appears where before there was only form, identification with form. So you lose your fear of death here because you're dying already. It's voluntary death. And it's beautiful. And you realize, of course, people think life and death are the two opposites. Of course they are not. Birth and death are the opposites. One can't exist without the other. Life has no opposite. Life is beyond form, and it's that realization. When a thought subsides in your mind, even if only for a moment, that's death, ultimately speaking, because as one thought subsides, The next one has not appeared yet. There also is an opening. And so this becomes a state of permanent connectedness, as long as you still walk around in this form, a state of permanent connectedness with that dimension of the formless one life that you are, the one consciousness that you are. That is the essence of all life forms that could be anywhere in the universe. The essence of that, the one intelligence, the one consciousness manifesting as billions of life forms. One of them, the appearance of a person with a name, a little history, a little past, a little future, and then that form dissolves. And to realize that which is beyond form frees you from identification with form, which is the world. And you realize it here, now, when thought subsides. Oh. And in many of you, spaces, although really one should only use this word in the singular, but I'll just for a while use it in the plural, spaces in many of you of pure awareness, pure presence, are arising already in your life. So that is a beautiful death that is already happening, which is the transformation of consciousness. You don't have to wait for physical death to come close to you. When it comes, it's beautiful. But you don't have to wait for that. You can embrace that now. And that is the transformation where you are no longer identified with a form. The form is still there, yes. The story is still there, but it's not who I am. My life situation is still there. It might be good, it might be bad. It's not who I am. Who am I? I am that which is prior to all form. Is that a belief? No, any belief is form. How do I know that? I know that in the stillness of presence. I know that when I can look upon something, whether it be a flower, a tree, or even a man-made thing, although nature is more conducive to this realization, you look upon something without the old compulsive need to immediately label, interpret, or call it something, or see how you relate to it, how it fits in with me and my story. You just look, and there is a clear space of awareness, and it can happen at this moment as you sit here. You're perceiving the words as if they were coming out of yourself. You're perceiving perhaps a body sitting on a chair. You're perceiving peripherally the rest of this room. It's there. And the amazing thing that those perceptions are arising in awareness. They are not labeled, interpreted, judged. You don't need to find a personal relationship to those perceptions. They are allowed to be. They are now. They are allowed to be. So what you have at any moment, the one moment, no matter what form it may take, the moment always has two dimensions. And this is so important. It should be what children could learn at the age of 6, the first thing at school. The one important realization in everybody's life is this. There are two dimensions. Now, usually humans are only conscious of one dimension, the world. The dimension of objects that arise in consciousness as sense perceptions and thoughts and emotions. That is the world that most people inhabit, the world of object consciousness, sense perceptions, and of course you get drawn into them, and then immediately the mind comes in with thought objects to find how thought relates to that perception and that perception. That is the world, that is the human mind. That is the only world that people know, and it's a fearful world, because objects are not reliable. They come and go. It's form. They are born, they die. So you have to hang on. Something leaves you here, leaves there. You inhabit only object consciousness, and your whole sense of self is object consciousness. You have a self-image, you have a conceptualized sense of self, of me, and every concept is a thought. Every thought is an object in consciousness. That's the world people inhabit, and they're looking for something to free them from that dilemma which everybody perceives who is alive. That human existence is a dilemma, and everybody is looking somehow to get free, but they are looking for freedom from the dilemma of human existence and the pain of human existence. They are looking for freedom in the realm of object consciousness. Where can I find that thing that's going to free me finally? It could be a person, it could be some achievement, it could be some money, or it could be the idea that I have of spiritual enlightenment. I've just got to get there. And then spiritual enlightenment becomes an object in your mind, and you think, I need to have that. That'll free me. I tried the $2 million, didn't work, didn't free me. I've tried the relationships, I've tried knowledge, but now another object in consciousness. So that's the world. It's a world in which I'd like to quote, because that is the world, both the collective world and the personal world of each human being consists of that. Because what is in the individual manifests as the collective of human history, which, as I've quoted many times before, I love that quote, Churchill defined human history as one damn thing after another. And he's right. And for many people in their personal lives, they could say that too. How's your life? Or how has your life been? One damn thing after another. Just when I thought I made it, something else cropped up and didn't want that, or then I lost it again, or I thought it would make me happy, but it made me unhappy. As the old saying goes, there are two ways of being unhappy: getting what you want and not getting what you want. So looking, not realizing what they are looking for as if it were something external to them, as if it were something that can be obtained at some future point that never comes. Instead of looking there, the one where they are not looking is what they were looking for, that which frees them from that dimension, although you're still in it, but frees you internally, is quite simply the realization of the other dimension. So what I called object consciousness is the dimension of the manifested world. Things everywhere. And the other dimension is the dimension of the unmanifested. And we could call that space consciousness. To realize that space is already here within you. And a few people have realized it through death, when something important in their object consciousness dissolved and left behind a gaping hole. And they faced it. Somehow, for some reason, they just sat there and didn't run away from it and didn't seek refuge in explanations and just sat with it as the woman sat with her dying son, and the hole appeared. And it was the most sacred moment in her life and changed her forever. And that is already here now, and it's here. It begins to arise in the moment you look at a flower and perceive it clearly without any mental commentary. So that at that moment, the two dimensions, you are conscious in the two dimensions. You're conscious of the manifested. And you sense that field of stillness, of presence, in which that perception happens, is the underlying unmanifested. It's the essence of who you are. And perhaps then it's gone again. Perhaps after a few seconds words come in. And then again another moment comes when you look upon something else, a stone. And there's the sense perception and the old, deeply ingrained habit of automatic, compulsive labeling is relinquished. And in many of you, I know this is already happening spontaneously, and you may not even notice it, except as peace coming into your life occasionally. And then once you notice it, you can consciously contribute to it by more and more existing in this world, especially when no demands are being made, and there are often during the day, there are times when you can just you're waiting for something, standing somewhere, sitting somewhere, and simply perceiving, looking, hearing, what other perceptions there may be, and the perception arises in a field of simple presence or stillness. This is an amazing thing, but to the mind is thought, that is insignificant. It says, what? It's not interesting. What's the next thing? Okay, you've spoken about stillness, now let's go on to the next thing. It doesn't recognize it. What happened to me spontaneously to this form, overnight there was a letting go of compulsive labeling. There was deep surrender, and suddenly the next morning there was simply allowing everything to be as it is. The need to label was gone. Labeling could still happen when it was needed, but a lot of the time it wasn't needed and isn't needed. So I would walk around the city, especially the first few days or weeks, because it was totally new. And maybe some people thought I had taken something. And it is true that some people get a glimpse of that when they take a drug, and for a moment they are forced into presence because their sense perceptions become so acute that they can't think anymore. And it can be a realization for some people of what life can be like without the constant noise in the head. That there can be space, but this doesn't last, the drug won't last. This is much better. So I walked around in amazement, and that is a state of amazement that really stays with you, because you never say, okay, what's the expression? Seen this, done that, or been there, done it, or whatever the expression is. That means it's all old. And for many people, the older they get, the more lifeless their world becomes. They get older and they've seen it all, they've done it all, nothing new, okay. So the world becomes stale. Not the world, but their state of consciousness, which is heavy with past. And so breaking through that happened to me spontaneously, and I walked around in that state of every sense perception happened within a field of peace. And that was just amazing. I was walking around Oxford Street in London, one of the least peaceful places, 1 million people walking along trying to do their shopping, buses and taxis in the middle with fumes, and I was walking around, it's peace. All the sense perceptions arising in a field of stillness. And I didn't realize until much later, when I talked to a Zen monk a year later, who said one sentence. He just said, Zen is to stop thinking. That's all. That's what it is. And then, that's what it is. I didn't know that I had stopped thinking. And I know that this is the shift in consciousness that is destined to happen and is already happening on the planet. I know that many of you already spontaneously experience those kinds of perceptions when you can simply look, hear, just to mention the two main senses, and the perception arises in an alert spaciousness, peaceful stillness. So you are not perceiving as a person anymore, as a me with a history, and the person, of course, wants something from the object of perception. There's always some kind of relationship that the person is seeking to make with the object of perception. Either the person wants it, or the person fears it, or somehow trying to figure out how this object of perception fits into me. Is it important to me? Am I going to be more of me when I add that to me? Yeah, okay, I want that, yeah. And then the flower that you were looking at, you pick it, because now you can take it home. It's mine. Just a small example, it happens on all levels. You meet another human being. Again, how can you be with that being and look at that human being, listen to that human being, allow this moment to be, this human being that appears here in front of you at this moment, and just listen, just look. Without the person, is it possible to do that? Yes, it's possible, because it's time for that. And people are telling me it's already happening in their life, and then it becomes obscured again, and then it comes again. But now that you can see it, you can contribute to it also by simply choosing presence and becoming aware of the underlying field, which is the deepest level of who you are, as the song that Kirtana sang at the beginning, the title of that was I Am. Not I am this or that, because that would mean identifying with an object in consciousness. But when the identification, what remains is consciousness, I am. The innermost sense of who you are that got mixed up with identification with objects in your consciousness, the innermost sense remains. That which you are really fearful, that which you have a feeling there's something of great value, something precious here, and I don't want to lose that. I don't want to die. But this precious sense of beingness, of aliveness, of presence, in the usual state gets entangled with objects in consciousness, identifications. And so you derive your identity from the story, the accumulated objects in your mind. But if you look to the essence of that sense of self, there is something real there, but it's not the story. At the core of it, there's something real, and that's consciousness. Even the greatest illusion, the greatest dream, hallucination, in every illusion or hallucination, there must be something real in it, or otherwise it would not be. If it is, it is a form that consciousness has taken, temporary form. A hallucination is a form that only you see and nobody else agrees with. The rest is this world. Everybody more or less agrees on what they see. In ultimate terms, one could say it is also similar to a shared hallucination, especially the nightmare world of the ego. Oh, dreadful. So the simple thing, what looks so insignificant to thought, you can walk around the city, wherever you're at home, walking between here and your car, and simply be there as an aware presence. The person, what do you need the person for? When you need to remember something, it will be there. When you pick up the phone, you don't say, "This is the nameless presence," or as one man said who wanted to teach me a lesson when I asked him, When were you born? He said, I was never born. Oh. Oh, sorry, I asked that question. He's right, of course, although the way he said it was wrong. It was an ego thing, but ultimately that statement is true. The essence is of who you are was never born. So the shift now is from being a heavy person. Every person is heavy. There are degrees of heaviness. I'm not talking about physical heaviness, psychological heaviness. There are degrees of heaviness. Some persons are heavier than others. Some are very heavy. Wherever they step, nothing grows. Humanity as a whole is heavy. The collective person that humanity is, and see what humanity is doing to the planet. Well, one could almost say that somewhat humorous comment I made could apply to the whole of humanity, that nothing grows where they step. And that is the heaviness of the collective, unconsciousness. And so the shift then is from personal, exclusively personal sense of self to realizing yourself as aware presence, and be that. And you will find, because we are at a transitional stage in the shift of consciousness, it is possible that you may walk away from here and never again fall back into resistance to what is, never again fall back into identification with thought movement, and be present for the rest of your life, which after all is only this moment ever, but always. It's possible. More frequently it happens that you shift back and forth from being a person and totally believing that you are a person. That means drama starts. You become an active participant in the drama of your story. And then suffering comes. And then you remember, oh, I forgot the now. Any suffering that arises in your life, it must mean you lost the now somewhere. I lost the now. And then you go back into now and realize the space of now is okay. Whatever appears in the now, I can face that. It's not, the now is never that complicated. It comes, you face it, and action arises, or non-action arises if there's nothing you can do. That's always simple. Even if you think there's a choice in this moment, should I do this or this or this? When you let go of trying to figure out through thought, you just face the situation. Should I jump this way off, or should I jump that way? You just face it, and then you find yourself moving this way or that way. And that comes out of presence. And so you face this moment, and your life becomes non-complex. And of course, the power is always there, that arises out of consciousness or presence. The power to face what is always there. The only thing you can never face is what the fantasies that the mind constructs of what might happen to you, or what you might lose, or what you might not get, or a situation that may arise. Oh, what's going to happen? What am I going to say? What's going to happen to me? Me. Am I going to make it? Oh, and when? Am I going to make it before it's too late? Have I missed it already? Is my whole life wasted? I've probably missed the boat already. There's not much I can do now. So many mistakes I made. All I could have achieved this and that. Why didn't I? If only my parents had been different. Or many people have this story of their life has been a failure and wasted. Not silly story. Every story is unsatisfying. Even if it looks great for a moment, you get miserable again. It's built into every story. Step out of it. Where just presence. And then the life is miraculous. Even the city, things, the dance of life forms, birds fly. You just look, and it's gone. Clouds, nature has depths to it because you don't go through it with a screen of mind. It's just there. Oh. Human beings, and this is so important, when that dimension of what I call space consciousness is present in your interactions with other human beings. That's what really everybody is waiting for, is for that dimension to arise. They're waiting for you, one could almost say, every interaction. You can bring that. Who are you? On the surface, you're a person. In your depths, you are consciousness. So you interact with humans in the same way that you look at a flower, allowing them to be. They are what is at this moment, and you look. Perhaps you sense the inner body so that you don't get drawn into mental stuff about them, and you listen to them. And you listen without preparing the next statement mentally, you just listen. You don't know. People used to come to me for counseling, or whatever they called it, spiritual counseling sessions. And in the past, many people came with problems, sometimes heavy problems. I didn't know the answer. I don't know the answer to these heavy problems. What do I know? So all I could do was sit there with them and listen. And becoming comfortable with not knowing. Because that's part of it, and that's the little egoic entity doesn't like that. It says, I need to know what this is all about. I need to know what you are about. What are your motivations? What do you want from me? Whatever you can figure out about another person is their conditioning combined with your conditioning. And it's a shared hallucination. And then you can be with someone and they're telling you their heavy problems. And you know that you don't know. And you are comfortable with not knowing and allowing that space of simple listening to be there. But it's alert. It's not a listening that goes to sleep. It's an alert listening, relaxed alert. So the words appear within that spaciousness that comes through this form. That is the dimension that most humans are not conscious of, the unmanifested space consciousness. And when that dimension is present in this dimension, they're not really separate because they're intertwined. There is space consciousness even in, let's leave that aside. And suddenly within that space, things happen, realizations happen. the person may stop speaking, as sometimes happens. The story suddenly peters out, and they look around, and suddenly feel there's a peace. What's this? One woman came in with a heavy story and talked to me for half an hour or an hour about it. And spaciousness was there. I didn't know the answer. The problems were so complicated. Nobody could have solved them. And after 30 or 45 minutes of talking, she stopped. And it was like a waking up. She had all these notes that she needed to all their problems, and she put that